Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Friday, March 22nd, and today is the 168th day since the attacks by Hamas on southern Israel. Big news today at the United Nations as a draft resolution that was tabled by the United States. It took weeks for this to be brought to a vote. The United States draft resolution was voted on today by the UN Security Council, and the draft stated that it was imperative for there to be an immediate and sustained ceasefire to protect civilians on all sides, facilitating essential aid delivery and supporting ongoing talks between Israel and Hamas militants to create a sustainable end to the hostilities tied to the release of hostages. Russia and China vetoed the U.S. resolution. Several ambassadors have now voiced their support by the E10. So E10, I had to look this up, refers to the 10 elected non-permanent Security Council members. So they are working on a new resolution that will call for an immediate ceasefire. The E10 resolution is expected to be considered tomorrow morning, March 23rd. But the U.S. said earlier today that the current version of that proposal, quote, fails to support sensitive diplomacy in the region, end quote. They also said, quote, we should not move forward with any resolution that jeopardizes the ongoing negotiations, end quote, hinting that another veto may be forthcoming. So what's the issue? Many people have been saying that the U.S. has shifted their tune. Personally, I don't see that in their draft resolution, but the major complaint by many is that the U.S. draft resolution did not demand or compel a ceasefire. And some of the states argued that the U.S. resolution was a green light for the Israel Rafah offensive. Another argument was that there was this direct tie to the facilitation of aid. And aid is not allowed by international law. Food, water, these basic life needed services, those are not allowed to be used in negotiations. Those are mandated. You can't take water away from people. That is a crime against humanity. And so that being included in the U.S. resolution was problematic. Following the veto, the U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield warned the veto could jeopardize negotiations for a ceasefire. I find it funny that the U.S. has vetoed so many other resolutions, and then now the U.S. is saying we're jeopardizing, or the world is jeopardizing, the potential for a ceasefire. It's kind of ironic. Likewise, an alternative draft resolution, they were talking about this alternative resolution that's circulating. Sorry, I'm kind of getting I don't mean to be sarcastic. French President Macron said France will work on a new resolution for a ceasefire. I had a meeting today with a few other board members from Churches for Middle East Peace who traveled with me to the Middle East in January with members or staff from USAID. We were discussing the catastrophe in Gaza. We heard a readout of the administrator's recent trip to the region. We heard about the U.S. efforts to increase humanitarian assistance. And that there were some very high-level officials in this meeting. And honestly, I don't know how many minutes I made it. I went into the meeting frustrated, but after a few minutes into the meeting, I interrupted and I just said, excuse me, which is very rude in these meetings, particularly with very high-level officials. And I said, with all due respect, I said, please don't waste my time. I said, there are, 7 or so, officials from the USAID, and we had several people on the call. And I said, we don't want to waste your time, and please don't waste ours. You're telling us things we already know. And we're very open to hearing if you have information, that we don't know, and we're open to having a constructive conversation. And I'm grateful for grace. I'm not my best self in these days. And I'm grateful that after that interruption we had, I think the conversation had a turning point, and we were able to talk, at least to some degree, about some of the dynamics at play and some of the reasons that progress is not being made and the work that needs to be done to overcome stumbling blocks for a comprehensive ceasefire to be able to be achieved. At least I was honest in the meeting. One of the things that we heard and that a certain U.S. official communicated, this person said that they have seen famine and hunger all over the world, and some of the worst famines recorded, but they have never seen anything like what they've seen and witnessed in Gaza. Friends, all of our efforts are not in vain, and we cannot give up. We must continue to call for an end to the bombing, an end to the Israeli invasion. We have to call for negotiations and a comprehensive ceasefire. We must. In the past couple of days, I've gotten some updates about global humanitarian agencies. I told you I'd follow up on this. Global humanitarian agencies have been calling on the U.S. government to stop sending weapons to Israel because of Israel's cutting off of aid to Gaza. And I have a much better understanding of what that's all about. There's actually two primary mechanisms, according to U.S. law, that would require us in the application of law to withhold weapons sales to Israel. So one was that Presidential Security Memorandum 20 that I've talked about in the past. The other is the mechanism that the humanitarian agencies were talking about, and I wasn't familiar with it, so I wanted to mention it. It's the application of 620I of the U.S. Foreign Assistance Act. It's an obscure provision that's been rarely applied. It's incredibly relevant. The provision says no assistance can be furnished under this act of the Arms Export Control Act to any country when it's made known to the president that the government of such country prohibits or otherwise restricts directly or indirectly the transport or delivery of U.S. humanitarian assistance. So if the U.S. is trying to get humanitarian assistance into Gaza, and if Israel restricts that in any way and that is made known to the president, we are required to not assist them with any arms being given to that country. That is a provision of our U.S. Foreign Assistance Act. And so the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza, Israel's role in restricting humanitarian assistance in the territory has prompted a number of U.S. lawmakers, including Nancy Pelosi, to invoke Section 620I and bar military assistance to Israel because of its impeding U.S. humanitarian assistance to Gaza. The Biden administration has yet to adequately explain publicly or to members of Congress in private, it seems, how it squares this law with widespread reports of Israel's obstructing delivery of assistance into Gaza. I already talked about the Presidential Security Memorandum 20, and I'll remind you that if there are any questions about U.S. military assistance being used in the violation of international humanitarian law in Gaza, the Center for Constitutional Rights, is currently appealing a case where they've argued President Biden and other administration officials are complicit in genocide in Gaza. The implication being that U.S. weapons, are also being used in the violation of human rights. In terms of ceasefire and hostage negotiations, the Israeli delegation headed by their Mossad chief is leaving for Doha today to continue negotiations with Hamas. They're expected to meet with the CIA Director Burns and the Qatari Prime Minister and Egypt's Intel Minister as well. U.S. Secretary of State Blinken landed in Israel today and met with President Herzog, Prime Minister Netanyahu, and Minister Gantz and the War Cabinet. Blinken reaffirmed the U.S. commitment to Israel's security and the lasting defeat of Hamas, and he updated Israeli officials about the state of negotiations and emphasized the need to protect civilians in Gaza and increase aid. And friends, I've been hearing people, many who are in alignment with our policy asks, and they've said the U.S. administration has changed their tune, and it doesn't sound any different to me when we're hearing the same thing. That's the exact same rhetoric we've been hearing from the Biden administration since mid-October or late October. And with, roughly 180 plus Palestinians dying a day, and the catastrophic food and hunger crisis, that over the next few months, by July will result in 100% of the entire population of Gaza having an acute issue of malnutrition. After nearly 6 months, it seems like our priorities have not shifted at all. Following the meeting, Netanyahu made a defiant statement claiming that he told Blinken that Israel intends to conduct a ground operation in Rafah with or without the U.S. support. Netanyahu said, "I told him we won't be able to beat Hamas without entering Rafah and killing the rest of their battalions. I told him, I hope we'll do this with the U.S. support, but if we need to, we will do it alone." I have heard from friends in Israel that if we do not figure out how to get out of this cycle, that we could be on the brink of a Middle East war or maybe even a third world war. I'm not trying to be hyperbolic. I'm not trying to be catastrophic, but I just want to say, Biden administration, please wake up. There is a catastrophe happening in Gaza, but we are on the brink of a catastrophe in the broader Middle East. And I don't know what we think we're doing, even in terms of our own future and our relationship with the broader world. At the airport, Blinken warned Israel against an operation in Rafah. He said it risks more civilians, it risks wreaking greater havoc with the provision of humanitarian assistance, and it risks further isolating Israel around the world, and it could jeopardize long-term security and standing. The families of Israeli-American hostages held in Gaza met with Blinken during his trip. Blinken also spoke with dozens of Israelis protesting the release of hostages who blocked the Tel Aviv, protesting for the release of hostages who blocked the Tel Aviv road near the hotel where he was staying. The IDF said that Lieutenant Colonel Ofer Caspi, a battalion commander who said in an interview with Army Radio, he said that Israel should resettle Gaza. I was listening to some statistics that said, actually, there's a very significant movement, more than 20% or something, there's a movement, about resettling Gaza that has been summoned for, this lieutenant colonel was summoned for a reprimand with his superior officers. The second Friday prayers of Ramadan at the Al-Aqsa Mosque passed without incident, and the Jordanian Waqf, the controlling body from Jordan of the Temple Mount, estimated 120,000 worshippers attended. The Israeli police said it was only 50,000, so somewhere between 50,000 and 120,000 worshippers. Over 10,000 came from the West Bank, and it was without incident. That's from an Israeli newspaper. The IDF said there's a new point of entry for Gaza aid, which is allowing in unlimited supplies. That's from the IDF. The IDF says there is no starvation in Gaza. That is what they said today. And they have a new gate crossing that is open. They allowed in, guess how many trucks? 7 trucks entered through the gate today. The operation in Al-Shifa Hospital is continuing. Australia and Britain have a joint statement saying that a ground offensive in Rafah will have devastating consequences. The U.S. House passed a $1.2 trillion spending bill that includes a ban on U.S. funding for UNRWA through March of 2025. The bill has to be passed by the Senate. They have until midnight tonight. The death toll is now 32,070 Palestinians killed, 74,298 injured. In the West Bank, 8 Israelis were wounded after a Palestinian shot at a minibus near a West Bank settlement of Dolev. One of the wounded is in serious condition. The IDF said the gunman was found and shot by a combat helicopter after he fled the scene. Spain has agreed with the leaders of Ireland, Malta, and Slovenia to take first steps towards recognizing a Palestinian state. Hostilities have continued between the border of Israel and Lebanon, and also between Houthis in Yemen and the U.S. and our allies. Keep your eye out for tomorrow, Saturday the 23rd. We will be doing Facebook Live on our social media, if I can figure out how to do it. Here in DC, but also Chicago and other cities across the U.S. Please tag hashtag, for the global, the Gaza ceasefire pilgrimages. The hashtag is GC for Gaza ceasefire, GC pilgrimages. They're happening all over the world tomorrow, Gaza ceasefire pilgrimages. And we will continue to pray and to work for a comprehensive ceasefire, which is so, so, so desperately needed.